Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of my first ever composing and arranging tutorial, how to create an SAB choral arrangement. In this video, we're going to complete our SAB arrangement of Praise to the Lord the Almighty, and I'm going to show you a different approach to creating the parts. So in part 1, we derived our parts from the chords and the chord progressions. But this time, we're going to pretty much forget about the chords and derive our parts from the melody. Now, this will still be very much a rinse and repeat kind of process, meaning you'll come up with some initial SAB parts, then you'll listen to them and improve upon them or try something different, listen, improve, and so on. Unless, of course, you are Mozart and you can compose them perfectly the first time. As always, be sure that the hymn you're arranging is in the public domain, and if it's not, be sure to obtain the proper copyright permissions. So with that said, let's forgo the lengthy introduction and jump right in. Alright folks, to get started, let's do a little thought exercise. Let's take a simple melody and do the following. First, we'll come up with a harmonic line that runs in parallel sixths or thirds to our melody. And second, we'll create another harmonic line that sustains on one or maybe two pitches. And I believe a demonstration is in order. So here is our melody, a warm-up we are all familiar with, I'm sure. And I'm going to very simply write a harmonic line that runs parallel to our melody 1/6 below, like this. Now, let's create a second harmonic line, but this time we're going to look for sustained pitches that complement the two parts we created in a previous step. For now, let's keep our voices in closed position. Here we go. So that was pretty simple, right? And coming up with that third voice that sustains, it just takes experimentation and practice. Let's give this a listen. Now it's pretty rare that either the baritones or altos will always be singing the parallel harmonic line, like the baritones are here. More than likely, they're going to trade it off, and let me show you what I mean. So, starting over with our melody, I'm going to put the altos in parallel thirds below the melody right here. Now, I'm going to stick the baritones in parallel sixths below the melody right here. And then the altos pick it up again here in parallel thirds. Now we're going to look for sustained pitches that we can use to fill in the gaps. And like I said earlier, it just takes practice and experimentation. So here we go. And let's give this one a listen. Okay, now let's apply this process to Praise to the Lord. So here's the melody of the last half of Praise to the Lord. So let's start off by writing an alto harmony line 1/3 below the melody in these first 5 measures, like this. Now we're going to create our baritone line using sustained pitches. And for now, let's try to keep our chords in closed position, meaning we're not going to skip notes as we build each chord from soprano to alto to baritone. Here we go. Great! we already have an SAB arrangement. Now let's harken back to part 1 of this tutorial, and remember, after we create our initial arrangement, we need to go back and check it out for range and possible voice leading issues. So let's do a quick scan and see if there are any problems with range. Right off the bat, I can see that the baritone part is way up in the rafters here. So let's address this. For these first 2 measures, I want to change these chords from closed position to open position. And all we have to do is flip the alto and baritone notes like this. And now everybody's happy here. On to the next 2 measures, where the baritones are still pretty high. Let's make the following change. So we've fixed one problem, and now we've created another one. Time to rinse and repeat. Right here, we've got parallel fifths between the soprano and baritone lines. Now folks, you don't have to avoid parallel fifths. If that's the sound you want, then by all means use them. But in this traditional hymn, I want to avoid parallel fifths. So let's suspend the alto F and baritone D right here by 1 beat, and our problem will be solved, just like this. So we've solved the issues with the range in these 5 measures. Now let's do a check of the voice leading. So let's listen to the alto and baritone parts by themselves. And we want to listen for odd skips and or places where the musical line just doesn't sound smooth. So here is the alto line. That's a very smooth alto line with lots of stepwise motion. Good. So let's move on to the baritone part now. Here it is. Once again, we've got a very smooth and singable line for our baritones. And that's great. But to my ears, it sounds kind of dull. And we want to create interesting parts for our baritones and altos. And folks, the truth is, a lot of times, the inner voices, they just get stuck with the leftover notes. So let's see if we can't spice this up a bit for our baritones. With this change, I briefly brought the baritones into their upper range, but I think we're okay since it's so brief. Let's listen to this baritone part again and see how we brought life into it with just one small change. And before we move on, let's listen to these 5 measures with all of the changes that we have made. It is time to finish this arrangement. We've got just 4 measures left. So let's apply the technique we've been learning in part 2. We'll add a harmonic line in parallel sixths or thirds. Then we'll fill out the third voice with sustained pitches. This time I'm going to have the altos and baritones trade off the harmonic line like this. And now we fill in the gaps with sustained pitches like this. So now that we have our initial SAB parts, let's check for issues with the range. And I can tell already that we are good. Altos and baritones are well within their ranges. So let's move on to the voice leading. And before we listen to the parts individually, there is an issue that is just jumping off the page. Right here, we have created parallel fifths again between the sopranos and baritones. And once again, let's address this by suspending the alto F and the baritone D by one note, and our problem will be solved, like this. Let's listen to the alto line by itself now, and see if we can hear any issues with the voice leading. Here is the alto line. I'm not hearing any issues with the alto line, so let's move on to the baritone line and give it a listen. Okay, I think we can improve upon that baritone line. There's a rather awkward skip here and a skip here. So first, let's address this skip of a fourth from the A to the D. Now, what I found was, if I hold off on jumping up to the D just by one beat, like this, now the skip feels a lot more natural, and it also places a nice emphasis on this lovely suspension here. Now, on to this skip from the C to the A. It just didn't sound good to me. Now remember from part 1, when you want to smooth out a skip of a third, just add a passing tone in between the two notes. Easy. Here we go. Let's listen to the baritone part with these changes. Okay, I think those changes have made the baritone line smoother and more singable. Now, because we've been arranging this hymn in small chunks, there is a big skip in the baritone line I didn't even notice. Allow me to back up one measure. And there it is. So I'm going to leave in this skip of a sixth. Now notice that on beat 3 here, we are on a C major chord. And on beat 1 of the next measure, we are still on a C major chord. And I point this out because skipping from one note in a chord to another note in the same chord, it's relatively easy to hear and sing. So moving on, finally, I'm going to make a small change just to add some rhythmic interest right here. We are done with these last 4 measures of praise to the Lord. Let's give them a listen. Alright folks, with that we are done with our SAB arrangement of Praise to the Lord. Now you may have noticed in part 2, I've hardly talked about chords and chord progressions at all. And that was on purpose because I wanted to focus on creating our parts from the melody rather than the chord progressions like we did in part 1. Now, because of this, there's a good chance that the original chord progressions are not going to align with the parts that we've just created. So, you may need to create an accompaniment part as well. In the video's description, I've added a link to a PDF of this arrangement with accompaniment and chords included. Feel free to print it off and use it. So we have yet to listen to the entire arrangement from start to finish. So let's do that right now. I have added choir and organ sounds, so hopefully it doesn't sound so dull and sterile. Here it is. folks, that is a wrap for part 2 of this tutorial. I really hope you have found it enjoyable and helpful. If you have an idea for a tutorial you would like to see me create, then leave a comment. And please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who you think might benefit from it. If you are interested in the notation software I use Finale, and I'll drop a link to Finale in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be posting more tutorials soon. Bye-bye.